Well, everybody, I must say, this video has been talked up quite highly to me before we get into it. It has been said by one of my fans who recommended that I watch this that it is the best video explaining anything ever. And it's called It's Never About Chromosomes. I like to think myself well-learned in the realm of research and information necessary to pull from if you're going to argue in favor of the validity of trans people's identities, but you can never know what you don't know, and I want to make sure that my arguments in every capacity are as well-honed as possible, which is why I think this video, if it is as good at explaining this issue as I think it might be, is worth giving a watch. Because fundamentally, very few people in the grand scheme of things understand the sociological and biological science behind sex and gender. Their differences, their similarities, where they kind of cross over with each other in some ways, and what trans people even are. I mean, seriously, how many times have you seen a random normie blatantly confuse drag queens, traps, femboys, gay men, and trans women, like, as the same thing? Like, how often do you see normies, conservatives, and even well-meaning people that are just kind of ignorant, confusing all of those group as, like, the same group, as, like, those are trans people. And their definition for a trans person is usually just one of those group. Maybe they know what trans people are, but more often than not, they think trans people are cross-dressers, or like a type of gay person, or like femboys are trans, or like that. It's a lot of that kind of stuff, right? And so, because so few people understand and are so ignorant on it, I think it's important that we brush up our information, improve and hone our rhetoric as much as possible, because our responsibilities, especially on this issue, is to educate normies and to inform them on why what they believe now is incorrect and misinformed, and replace their misinformation they may be holding on to with proper, correct information. That said, let's check out this video. It's called It's Never About Chromosomes. There will be a link down below in the description at the very top of it. I highly recommend you go give this video a watch and a like and a comment and a sub, because it seems like it's very good. But with that aside and that said, let's hop right into it. I want to see how good this video really is. Will it live up to the expectations that have been talked up about it? We will see.
Viewer discretion is advised. Here's the usual story. We're all born with either XX or XY chromosomes with one of two kinds of parts between our legs, eagerly waiting to fill our preordained roles.
Yeah, and this is what, like, 99% of people think. Or maybe 95% of people think. It's not accurate, it's oversimplified, and it is a mostly human conceptualized idea that most people take for granted as objective, you know, as just the set-in-stone reality. Because most people think this is what they observe.
None of that is true. When you're born, the doctor assigns you a sex based on your parts. Unless someone ran a karyotype test to diagnose a problem, nobody knows what chromosomes you have. You could have XXY chromosomes, for example, or just a single X. Some people are born with ambiguous parts. This is more often from a hormonal imbalance in the womb than...
This is very true. We're off to a very good start with this video. The crazy thing is, chromosomes determine... Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because I might have the order a little off here, right? Hormones in the womb determine the direction of development of a fetus, and said hormones will determine whether or not the chromosomes will become XY or remain XX in most cases, but that process of changing can sometimes, quote-unquote, go wrong, as some might say, and result in outcomes chromosomally that are different than the norm. So you've got, like, your XXY or your XXYY incorrect, so I'm wrong about that for XCL. I was under the understanding it had to do with something to do with hormones, or is it just like the gamete, like the actual DNA of the fetus is, like, determines the developmental pattern? The X and Y are determined by the sperm. Okay, yeah. So once the gamete develops, it's like basically determines where it goes. Okay, yeah. Makes sense. All right, I just had that a little mixed up. My bad. But yeah, that determines. My bad. I had it like mixed around. So that determines the hormones that are released, and obviously, even in the womb, hormones are being produced by a fetus, and that is affecting the direction of development. But when like your chromosomes are like weirdly off and are not like the norm, that tends to result in outcomes that are outside the norm, but not always. Not always. In fact, there was a guy. He regards himself as a guy. Most people regard him as a guy, so we're gonna say guy. There was a guy who was born with, like anyone else, a penis and testicles. And there was no reason to suspect that he was not a cisgender male man. A male man. There was no reason not to suspect that or to assume that. And so he lived like up until his 20s or 30s as a man, as you would, right? But he had these like weird stomach cramps that were recurring. So he decided to go to a doctor about it. So they ultrasounded his abdomen. And do you want to know what they found when they ultrasounded and x-rayed his abdomen? A nearly fully intact, borderline functional uterus and ovaries. A lot to go with his fully developed penis and testicles. His fully developed and functional penis and testicles. This is not that rare of a story, and this is not how it always bears out. It bears out in countless different ways. And this is just one of those things where it's like, I guess just because 99% of cases go this certain way doesn't mean that's the only way it goes. And frankly, so few people even know what intersex is, and if they've heard the term, they probably assume it's some newfangled woke identity or something. Once they find out and learn that that is a scientifically recognized real thing, that shatters their conception of how simple like gender and sex is. Because once you realize it really is not as simple as male, female, XXXY, that is a mind blower for most people. Once I found out that the scientific community did not believe sex was binary, I was like, no fucking way. Really? And it blew my mind reading that research the first time. Like, it was crazy. And I was pro-trans by that point. So this is like, a lot of people would probably call bullshit if you told them this. You're going to have to be able to, like, pull out the evidence and prove that this is true. Because people are going to want to, like, challenge this idea. It is so out there.
Are born with ambiguous parts. This is more often from a hormonal imbalance in the womb than from chromosomal shenanigans. Either way, you have a baby that's otherwise healthy but falls outside the popular conception of sex. They could grow up to live as a boy or a girl or something beyond, but how do they decide what's right? About half of us are assigned female at birth and about half are assigned male. One half is supposed to push an entirely new person into the world, and the other is supposed to sit nearby looking helpful. Yes, there are biological differences among the sexes.
So this is a big area where, like, transphobes and also just people who are ignorant on this topic kind of fill in the blanks themselves, right? In nature, it seems like, logically, all species should have two sexes / genders, right? It just seems logically, if you just use common sense, to make the most sense, right? It makes sense for there to be a biologically made for bearing the process of creating life and a stronger, more active, out there, able to travel about, less like needing to be devoted or attached to the raising of young, but able to create a lot more young, like male, right? And the idea from like a common sense biology perspective is like, yeah, and the males are always trying to fight over who's the strongest, who's the most dominant, and, you know, the prettiest and most biologically fit females are the ones getting fought over. So the most fit guys end up with the most fit girls, and they end up creating like strong children that then continue the species in the most optimal way possible, right? It's just biology and evolution. A lot of people think this way, and they kind of fill in the gaps there, right? And they think, yeah, so it just kind of makes sense. There would just be men and women, right? Women to carry children, men to implant them, right? Like that is how a species would work. And even those roles tie in well with our social and societal roles, right? Women are smaller with wider hips for giving birth to young, but that also makes them, generally weaker than men who don't have to carry a baby, but they're also bigger, stronger in general, and can do more like labor and whatnot. So it kind of follows women stay home, they raise children, men go out and they do labor. And our society kind of built from these assumptions based on what we thought was true of biology. Now, it's possible that biologically humans are meant to just be male or female, like man or woman, and only ever straight. But the fact is, gay people do exist. Trans people do exist, whose internal understanding of their identity on a core fundamental level does not align with the gender they were assigned at birth. And there are cases where people's chromosomes do not align with the XX or XY layout that we assume, and sometimes even their overt appearance physically is impacted by that. So unfortunately, for someone who wants to say that is how it is supposed to be, we don't know that, and there are outliers. So the fact that just to say, oh, well, the fact that in most cases this is how it goes must mean that's how it's supposed to go, just because you observe it. Well, we also observe those outliers. So by your logic, those outliers are supposed to happen too, right? Because they always use the term outlier, by the way. They never want to include these non-binary things in the binary, even when they exist. They have to come up with another label for them to exclude them. But without including them in anything that could make them not be part of the binary. It's very bizarre. It's erasure, really, is what it is. But the fact is, most people don't understand the biology behind reproduction. You don't have to look far beyond humans to see species that break that mold entirely. Like, there are tons of species who have completely flipped hierarchy status, right? Where females are bigger and stronger and run everything, and males are weaker and subservient and are basically existing as a harem of male suitors to a female that decides like who she wants to get impregnated by. Like hyenas do that, I think. Maybe lions do as well. Then you've got like fish. A lot of stuff in the ocean acts this way, like clownfish and seahorses will literally change their gender. Bees operate in a wild capacity, like their whole system is crazy. But yeah, tons of frogs literally change their sex all the time. Like it's known that frogs can just do that if they need to for the sake of their environment to propagate. The idea that just because that logically makes sense biologically and in nature, that must be how it's supposed to be, and thus our social standards and expectations should be locked into that, is absurd. Especially because even if that was the case, humans are greater than just animals. Like we have well surpassed. We are the number one apex predator on the planet for a reason. We have surpassed all the other animals. Like we can be better. We don't have to just consider survival and like evolution anymore. We are people.
Sexes, there are also differences that feel biological but aren't. The labels man and woman come with expectations for how to act, how to dress, how to live. Are you a girl who wants to wear jeans with big manly pockets? That's not very ladylike. Are you a boy who cries when Jesse's owner outgrows her? Man up! There's no law of the universe making girls wear clothes with tiny pockets or stopping boys from crying at old Pixar movies. Otherwise, we'd all behave exactly as we should, and this video wouldn't exist. This is baggage we place on the sexes as a society. That's gender, and that's what people mean when they call it a social construct. I think of gender as a two-sided coin. On one side, there's the performance. When you size someone up on the street, you quickly put them in the man column or the woman column and expect them to act accordingly.
A lot of people used to get hung up and triggered by the term social construct as if it meant not real. So calling something a social construct is not saying it's not real. It's saying that it's real because we believe it's real. It's real in the same way that the value of $1 is real. Like, Sure, it's just people saying it has value, but that dollar can also buy you lunch and pay your bills and get you a car and do so and so. You can use those dollars to do a lot of real tangible things. So even if money and currencies like the US dollar are a social construct, they're very real, you know? Even if like that piece of paper technically has no inherent value. In that same way, our conception of gender and even the words we speak have no inherent value. What gives them value is the social construct we've built where we all have a general understanding of what those words mean. When I say hello when passing someone, we've all existed in a society, for the most part, in which we know what hello means. We know it's a friendly greeting. And we like understand intention and respond in kind because that is the tool that language offers. But there is no objective English. There is no objective Spanish or objective French, right? Like it is just a socially agreed upon, like this is what this language is. And that changes over time. Ye olde English was damn near impossible to understand if you're a modern day English speaker, right? Because what was quote unquote objective English has not always been the same. Even going back 50 years ago, what was objective English wasn't the same as it is today. So it's not all that objective. It's just kind of what we decide it to be, right? We change the meaning of words all the time socially, and those definitions fundamentally change because so many people recognize the definition as something else now, that its use as meaning something else has been completely overridden. Anyway, back to it. Sorry to stunlock on that. Just a little diatribe about social constructs. People used to get really hung up on that idea that social construct meant not real.
A man is likely to be assertive, to be dominant, to harass total strangers. A woman is likely to be passive, to be subservient, to warn others about harassment. On the other side, there's our feelings about the performance. Your dad says you should play football, but you'd rather do ballet. Your boss says you should smile more, but you'd rather tell him where you can shove those words. It's the performance that makes the gender. There's no heads-up display telling you a stranger's chromosomes, so you can only tell by how a person carries themselves. If we wanted, we could decouple sex and gender with a hot take. Nobody likes a genital inspector. Unless you're actively practicing medicine, there's only one reason to want to know what's in someone's pants. With that attitude, you can carry yourself however you like. You might have noticed there's not just one way to be a man or a woman. Some men are lumberjacks, some are tennis players, some wear dresses on their album covers. There's a masculine ideal on one end and a feminine ideal on the other, and we all fall short in our own special ways. That's what people mean when they call gender a spectrum. We know what traits and behaviors go into these buckets, and most of us try to fit ourselves in.
A good example, by the way, is you might be the manliest man in the world. Like, everything about you is giga-masculine, but if you see a puppy or a cat, you're just like, oh my god, you little baby, I'll snuggle you forever, I'll always protect you, I'll never let you go. Like, you just turn into, like, a little, like, child when you see a puppy, right? Like I think people would argue that would make you a little less traditionally masculine. It doesn't make you not masculine, it just means that on the grand spectrum of masculinity, that's like 1 point more towards the more feminine side. But remember, there's nothing bad about being more feminine, nothing good about being more masculine. It just is. Whether or not you think it's good as a man to be more masculine or bad to be more feminine, that speaks greatly to your standards and your insecurities about how other people see you.
In one bucket. But, of course, some people don't fit into either bucket. And why would they? Our narrow cultural lens can't reflect the rich inner lives of everyone on Earth. Some folks might want to wear a suit with eyeliner and lipstick. They might want to crochet and mow the lawn. Whatever they do, they've adopted a gender identity beyond the fixed binary choice, so we broadly call these folks non-binary. In English, the most common pronouns for these folks are they, them, and theirs. This usage dictionary has a surprisingly deep history of pronouns.
I actually want to talk about this a little bit because I've noticed a lot of millennials and boomers and Gen Xers talking about how apparently in school, using they to refer to a singular unknown entity was oftentimes frowned upon grammatically. Supposedly, it was grammatically inappropriate, according to a lot of English teachers back in the day, to say, all right, let's say you called a taxi, right? And you ask your friend, how long till the taxi gets here? And the taxi guy, or the person who called the taxi doesn't know if it's a guy or a girl who's coming, so they say, they'll be here in 5 minutes. Supposedly saying they will be here in 5 minutes, using they there, is incorrect, was the claim. I think we all know that's not true. I think if you've spoken English for any amount of time, you can tell that saying they're on their way, they'll be here soon, they'll be here in 5 minutes, oh, that's them, when referring to someone singular, is not grammatically incorrect. We do this all the time without realizing it. We refer to individuals as singular individuals as they, them, all the fucking time. Where'd they go? Did they go to the store? Where are they at? Like, there's so many, like, I could think of a billion examples in which we use they, singular, to refer to someone. More often than not when you don't know their gender. Because otherwise you just use he or she. More often than usually. So yeah. This whole they them pronouns thing, not as out there as most people seem to be convinced it is. It's actually a pretty standard thing, actually. Like, it's people deciding to call themselves that instead of, hey, I just did it then, instead of other people. Well, yeah, they call themselves they them and also want other people to call them they them, which most people would already do even if they didn't ask, because people do that all the time. But now that they're asking for it, it's some kind of political thing. Politics, bro. Politics.
We've used singular they for a hypothetical person since the 14th century, as anybody
well,
can
there
see
you
for
go.
themselves.
He's given us
if
the
you wanted
breakdown.
to refer to a specific person of indeterminate gender, for a long time that was he, which caused friction among the non-he's. But singular they has been the prevailing standard in British English since 2000 and in American English since 2020. Prominent dictionaries recognize singular they even in the 20th century. This Random House dictionary, published in 1987, put it best. Such use is not a recent development, nor is it a mark of ignorance. If you have trouble using plural words for one person, well, notice that I said you have trouble and not you has trouble. The Romance languages, like Spanish and French, aren't so generous. They force binary gender on all people, all inanimate objects, and all abstract ideas. I bet language plays a big role in understanding gender, but I can't unpack that today. You don't need to change your pronouns to play with gender, see those guys from earlier, but I'll be the first to admit that I could never put on a dress. I just feel awful. If gender is both the outward performance and the inward conception, I feel a terrible disconnect between the two. It'd be like the opposite of euphoria, dysphoria. You've probably met someone who's trans. If you don't think you have, surely you've heard of the closet. Different people discover they're trans in different ways. Some people have known their whole lives. Others don't know until they're 40. Some people feel like they were born in the wrong body. Others were fine living as a woman, but they realize being a man suits them better. Some people were fortunate enough to explore their identity in a safe, supportive environment, whether that's among friends, online, or on stage. What binds them together is they were told how to live and it felt wrong. Where does this feeling come from? It's a difficult question. We all have ways we like to live, and we only get interrogated when we stray from the status quo. Why do you use macOS instead of Windows? Why be an artist when you can make more money coding? Why do you put pineapple on your pizza? What are you, stupid? For the handful of trans folks I spoke with, it's as natural to them as not being trans is to cis folks. I don't want to put on a dress, and neither do most trans men. It should be as simple as that. How many trans people are there? It's hard to say. Just look at this chart from Gallup. 2% of boomers report being LGBT versus 22% of Zoomers. What's more likely? That people are becoming more queer due to some unseen, insidious force? Or that the kind of self-reflection and experimentation that leads people to discover they're queer is becoming more acceptable? As a hint, here's a graph showing left-handedness.
Hey, I was just about to use the left-handedness thing. I love this. But here it is, literally the example I've used dozens of times to try and debunk the right-wing claim of LGBT being a social contagion. This is back when it was literally punished in schools if you were left-handed. You were forced to be right-handed. And so obviously left-handedness was on a consistent downtrend until they stopped punishing kids for being left-handed. And as more kids entered the school system, we saw a sharp rise. Uh-oh, guys, looks like left-handedness is a social contagion, except at around 12% or 11% maybe, a little over 11%. It completely flatlined to a consistent 11% of people, which I think is like 11.5 or 6 or 7, something like that percent of people is like the known stat of how many people are left-handed. It's 1 in 10 people roughly. So yeah, there's never been more or less left-handed people. There's just been more or less people forced into right-handedness. And once you stop any kind of that enforcement, sure, there will be a trend upwards, but always levels out because those people always existed, no matter how much those that want to discriminate against that group want to try and claim.
in the US by birth year. Students were forced to use their right hands until the mid-20th century when this chart plateaus. I hope to see a similar pattern in the LGBT poll someday when people are no longer afraid to be themselves. In the meantime, how do you deal with dysphoria? Start with the simple things. Change your hair, your clothing, your pronouns. Ask people you trust to try calling you by a different name. These low-risk experiments are easy to walk back, but if it feels right to you, that's when you can start considering the medical stuff. You'd think, with all the hysterical op-eds, that you could walk to the gender store and get a dozen surgeries today, but no. It takes a long time to get in front of a doctor, and even longer to transition. You should hear the details from
Oh no, the only way you can go to the gender store is if you're a cis person. Then you can just easily go get some, like, estrogen if you're a cis woman, or testosterone if you're a cis guy. Like, cis guys, it's literally, like, one of the most popular anabolic steroids for dudes is just straight injecting T. Like, cis dudes all around America are injecting T, like any trans guy would, for, like, steroid fitness gains. So yeah, there is kind of a gender store, but only if you're cis.
Actual trans people like Abigail Thorne and Alex Avila who've been generous enough to share their stories. If you're lucky, you can emerge on the other side as the person you'd like to be. Very few people get to medically transition, but those that do are overwhelmingly happy about it. This academic study says it best. Rate of regret after gender-affirming surgery is approximately 1%. Other life decisions, such as
very low rate of regret among trans people post surgeries and like stronger, more radical forms of transition. The few cases in which there is regret directly tie into their claim that they lacked any kind of like familial or friend support. So like if a trans person transitions and in the process they lose their entire friend group and family because they're not accepting, that can lead to regret, but not over transitioning, more so over doing something that led to their social life being so desperately harmed. And so while the rate of detransition is really low, like 90% of detransitioners cite that as the reason. Lack of support.
Having children and getting a tattoo have regret rates of 7% and 16.2% respectively. That moment where you no longer feel the disconnect between performance and self-conception is known as gender euphoria. What I found interesting in my interviews is a point beyond euphoria, where you stop thinking about your gender and move through the world as your true self. That's the real ideal. Trans people just want to live with dignity, as themselves, without intense scrutiny, misinformation, and hatred. I don't have to dwell on examples. Transphobia is in the water, it's in the air, it's in every newspaper you read. Instead, I'll try to dispel a few common myths about trans people.
Ooh,
Trans people have existed longer than you might think. As a synthesizer enthusiast, I have Wendy Carlos to thank for making these beepy little machines popular. She made Switched on Bach, a classical music album played on a giant Moog system. She socially transitioned in 1968 and underwent surgery in 72. You can find cultures across the world that recognize a group beyond typical cis men and women. Various Native American tribes, for example, have non-binary gender roles. These tribes have many languages and therefore many names for these roles, so we Baka Gaijin collectively call them Two-Spirit. But what about sports? Sports. It's just a game, folks. If you must know, the big sport leagues already had rules about trans athletes. Before Charlie Baker kissed the ring.
The whole, like, the trans sports thing is by far the most, like, winning topic for the transphobes. Most people will turn their brain off the second the image of a trans woman, like, ripped as fuck, like, beating the shit out of a cis woman in the ring. That is what they'll imagine, and they'll run with it. And it's so compelling of an argument that that one lady was, like, transvestigated and accused of being trans, and that story is marked as, like, a case of a trans woman beating a cis woman in a fighting sport when she literally was confirmed born a woman. Like, she is confirmed cis. She just had higher than normal testosterone levels because that happens with cis women. Yeah, main Calef. It just happens. Like, call me racist if you want, but this has been, like, a known thing. It's most commonly happens with black women. Black women, for some reason, have, like, slightly higher testosterone numbers sometimes than, like, women of many other races. And so the limits for what is considered suspicious rates of testosterone are sometimes tripped almost always by black women in the Olympics. And there have been scandals over this, and this is almost certainly another one of those cases where Amin Khalef just has a slightly higher testosterone level than most cis women, and that is what measured, that is what read, that is what people know, and they've taken that to mean she must be trans, when a trans woman wouldn't have higher than normal testosterone because she'd be taking T suppressors and actively taking estrogen. If anything, a trans woman would measure for below average testosterone and above average estrogen because it's being supplemented at such a high rate. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's been my general understanding of that entire shit show. And they have wrote that whole Amin Khalef thing down as a real story of a trans woman beating a cis woman, even though that's not what it was at all. But that is how everyone remembers it now. That is how brain poisoned people are. They've made up stories. They've accused cis women of being trans and just ran with it hard enough that most people fell for it. And the story's now well in the rearview mirror. There's no bringing people back from that lie on a grand scale because not enough people care anymore.
Trans women in the NCAA, of which there were less than 10, had to be on hormones for at least a year to compete in women's leagues. Trans women in the Olympics, of which there were 0 last year, are subject to a vague 10-point framework that each sport can interpret however it likes. The most dispiriting thing I hear is that the fight for trans rights diminishes other battles for equal rights. First of all, it completely ignores that trans people come in all shades. It's hard to be trans, and it's hard to be black, and it's even harder to be both black and trans. Second of all, I think a lot of transphobia comes from the vice presidential urge to treat women like furniture. If men and women were truly on equal footing, what would stop you moving from one side to the other? If gender is a social construct, shouldn't we work to construct gender without subjugation? Finally, it's a big world. We can fight on multiple fronts. For solidarity, this is where I have to reveal that I'm Puerto Rican. I've always thought the huffing and puffing about border security was absurd. What? I was born on the right patch of land, so I get to call myself an American, while people who look like me get torn from their kids and stuffed in cages? Bullshit.
Based.
I know some of you don't want to make this leap, but here's how I see it. Where you're born is arbitrary, and how you're born is too. Why should it matter if you want to live as an American or as a woman? I've made this video, despite not being trans, because a house divided cannot stand. If we can't empathize with the struggles of other people, what chance do we have to survive?
Damn. What a good final line. I really do think empathy is in short supply these days, and it's not just that the internet, which is where everyone spends their time now, is so lacking in incentivizing or rewarding empathy. The internet actively punishes empathy. We have a very anti-empathy culture online right now, and what I've noticed is, I think it's a trend. I think it is a pattern that directly correlates to a certain critical mass of teenagers really gaining influence on the internet. Like when you're 10, 11, 12, even 13 years old, you're a lurker. Maybe you post, maybe you're active, but you likely have no influence. You're like that 0-like commenter, like posting nonsense, like it's ignored in threads and stuff when you're like that age. Like, at least that was my experience when I was that young. But once you turn like 15, 16, 17, 18, especially like 17, 18, 19, that's when like you're old enough to actually have influence online. Maybe a YouTube channel, a prominent Twitter account, or like a social media account where you make posts and stuff. And there are enough people, like you occupy the internet in such a way where you're like an actual person who sounds like someone with real opinions and real life experience to pull from. People actually take you seriously because you don't come off as an obviously just a kid, right? And so what I've noticed is that like these we'll reach this point of critical mass where like a new batch of like 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds are like a substantial part of like the online like culture for a time. And their borderline sociopathic anti-empathy vibes, which is kind of true in a lot of teenagers, will like infect the whole internet culturally for a while. Mind you, a lot of content creators are making content for like high schoolers. Probably if I were to ballpark the age demographics of like YouTube at any given time. So you got to consider the high schoolers of 2016 that were all over the internet were looking for anti-SJW content. The high schoolers of today on the internet are looking for anti-woke content. I think that's the trend. I think that same batch is going to realize this shit is cringe and probably move substantially more left over time. That has been my prediction. But in the meantime, like this weird era of like right-wing online dominance and anti-empathy, I think it's because there's just so many 15, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old chuds dominating the internet culture right now, like kind of deciding it, like influencing it with their presence, you know? Anyway, I could be wrong. I'm actually curious what you guys think of that theory. But if you watched this far into the video and you want to let me know you enjoyed and you want me to make more and you want to support it for totally free, consider commenting down below. Just trans rights. Simply comment trans rights down below to let me know that you like this segment and you found it entertaining. It also helps a lot in the algorithm. The same goes for if you also hit the like button, that thumbs up button, and comment. That is the best way to support me. It's totally free, and it forces the algorithm to support my stuff. And on top of that, if you haven't already, and you want to see more from me on other platforms and on YouTube, you can subscribe and ring the bell icon to turn on all notifications, and follow my social medias linked down below in the description, especially my Discord server, where I host weekly gaming events, call-in streams, and watch parties, as well as announce all my new uploads and streams. So overall, I think it's a really good place to be. You won't miss anything, so I hope to see you there. And finally, if you want to support me directly, financially, help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buy some custom Xander Hall merch through the Streamlabs link down below. Regardless of how you support me though, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.